In the CBS Sports broadcast booth, Tony Romo sits up straight, headset pressed close, eyes locked on the field, as if he's still in the huddle. Before the ball is snapped, he smiles lightly into the mic. They're gonna fake the run left, then throw deep right. A few seconds later, it plays out exactly like that. The audience erupts in amazed laughter, and social media calls him a genius at reading the game again. But Romo isn't just an outstanding commentator. He was the heart of the Dallas Cowboys for over a decade, throwing for more than 34,000 yards, 248 touchdowns, making the Pro Bowl 4 times, and leading the NFL in passer rating in 2014. He holds many of the most important passing records in Cowboys history, bringing the team back to the playoffs in seasons that seemed lost. After retiring in 2017, he signed one of the most valuable sports broadcasting contracts in history, becoming a familiar face for America's biggest games. To the public, it's a journey of success, intelligence, and resilience. But there's another truth that's rarely mentioned. There was a time when all of America didn't call him a genius. They called him a choker. They remembered the botched snap in the 26 playoff game more than his spectacular comebacks. They mocked him, doubted him, questioned his clutch performance in big games. Meanwhile, Romo walked into the training room with his back screaming from a herniated disc, with a broken collarbone that broke again, getting pain injections just to keep playing. He smiled in front of 80,000 fans while his body was cracking apart. He stood at the podium in 2016 and said football is a meritocracy, accepting the loss of his job to a younger player, even though deep down he knew the Super Bowl dream might be closed forever. That's the double life of Tony Romo, the hero of America's team, and the man who quietly carried every failure. The brilliant quarterback under the lights and the person silently facing pain in silence. We see his smile today, and call it confidence. But few know it's the smile of someone who learned to endure, who lived through years of being misunderstood, and still chose to stand tall. Tony Romo lived 2 lives for 20 years, and maybe it's time we saw both. If Tony Romo's story makes you see football differently, hit subscribe so you don't miss more emotional journeys like this. Behind the broadcast booth lights and the applause for the genius at reading the game, Tony Romo's story didn't start in Dallas, didn't start at the NFL draft. It started in a small town called Burlington, Wisconsin, where there were no 80,000-seat stadiums, no national TV lights, just quiet roads, identical middle-class homes, and a boy who always tried to do everything right. Burlington wasn't poor, wasn't violent, had no loud tragedies to splash across headlines. The Romo family lived simply, steadily. His father, Ramiro Romo Jr., served in the U.S. Navy and carried that military discipline, punctual, serious, responsible. His mother, Joan, took care of the family with quiet patience and love. It wasn't a home lacking affection, but it was a home where achievement was respected, effort was seen as duty, and you weren't allowed to get complacent. In that small town, everybody knew everybody. Reputation spread faster than news. A high school game could become the talk of the week. A mistake on the field could get brought up at the grocery store the next day. And in that environment, Tony wasn't the biggest, fastest, or strongest kid. He was smaller than most of his peers, not the type of boy who stepped onto the field and instantly drew eyes. He wasn't the natural talent that made adults whisper that kid's going places. If anything stood out about young Tony, it was his work ethic. And maybe because he wasn't the chosen one, he felt early on something many kids don't face, the feeling that he had to prove something, constantly, relentlessly. The central emotion of Tony's childhood wasn't some great pain, but a quiet drive. He always felt he had to do just a little more, run 1 extra lap, stay 10 more minutes on the field, throw a few more balls after dark, not because anyone forced him, but because inside him was this persistent question, am I enough yet? That was the seed of the double life. On the outside, Tony was the friendly kid, quick to smile, ready to joke with friends, always seeming relaxed as if everything was under control. On the inside, he was afraid of being left behind, afraid of not getting picked, afraid that one day people would look at him and say, he's not big enough. He learned not to complain. If he lost, he blamed himself. If he didn't play well, he practiced more. He didn't bring his worries home to burden his parents. He didn't tell his friends he felt small among the bigger boys. He smiled, always smiled, not because there was no pressure, but because he understood early that weakness is rarely rewarded in the world of boys who want to play football. Over time, that smile became armor. People saw a confident, optimistic Tony Romo who never faltered. But behind that armor was a boy always wondering if he really deserved it. Sports became the one place where he felt he could control the story. On the basketball court, on the golf course, and especially on the football field, Tony found something precious. If he prepared enough, if he worked harder than everyone else, at least he could look in the mirror and say he'd done everything possible. No one handed him certainty. He had to build it himself, day by day. And every time he stepped onto the field, whether in youth leagues or high school, he carried not just the ball, but the fear of being seen as not enough. It was in Burlington, in that seemingly ordinary quiet, that the foundation for the man he became was laid. The man who would stand in massive stadiums and still smile when booed. The man who would sit at a national TV mic and keep his voice steady while the world argued about him. That man wasn't born with that smile. He learned it, learned to smile under pressure, learned to hide the anxiety and keep moving forward. And when America later saw Tony Romo always smiling through the most intense games, they didn't know that smile came from a boy in Burlington who never felt big enough, but still decided never to quit. If childhood in Burlington taught Tony Romo how to smile under pressure, then those cold evenings on the high school practice field taught him something even deeper. No one gives you belief for free. You have to build it yourself, one throw at a time. When his teammates had gone home, when the stadium lights went out one by one, Tony stayed. Wisconsin nights fell fast and cold, wind whistling through the goalposts with a dry sound, reminding him tomorrow would start with competition again. But he didn't leave. He set the ball down, stepped back a few paces, pictured an imaginary receiver running a route in the corner of the field, and threw, picked it up again, threw again. No one cheering, no one watching, just the sound of the ball hitting gloves and white breath in the night air. Teenage Romo wasn't a natural talent that forced coaches to build the offense around him. He wasn't the kind of player everyone just assumed would become a star. What he had was patience, and the fear of being forgotten. He understood early on that in a small town, where every achievement gets compared, if you're not stand out, you get pushed to the sidelines. So he trained like no one believed in him. He threw the ball like tomorrow someone might say he wasn't good enough. He studied the playbook harder, stayed in the weight room longer, ran extra laps no one asked for, not because he feared failure. Failure was something he was already used to facing. What he feared was becoming invisible. There were nights, when the last lights finally went out, Tony sat alone on the empty bleachers, staring down at the field and wondering if all these hours would lead him anywhere. He had no guarantees, no promises, just a fragile belief that if he did more than everyone else, maybe the opportunity would come find him. While his classmates went to parties, watched movies, or simply enjoyed a carefree teenage life, Tony chose to stay with the ball. He sacrificed the moments people call normal to chase something that wasn't even guaranteed to happen. And he did it not because success was certain, but because he didn't want to look back later and ask himself, what if I'd tried just a little harder? Afford. Which to set trade in nighters, which to trade in would simply can. In high school, he started to stand out more. The accurate throws, the improving ability to read situations, the calm in the pocket caught the coach's attention. But every compliment only made him work harder. Because in Tony's mind, praise wasn't the finish line. It was just a reminder that tomorrow you have to keep proving it. The motif of his life took clear shape. Prepare like no one believes in you. Prepare like tomorrow you'll have to defend your spot from someone faster, stronger. His friends saw a Tony Romo who smiled easily, always cracking jokes in the locker room, ready to encourage teammates after a bad play. They didn't see the boy lying awake at night, replaying the tiniest mistakes from the game, and promising himself they wouldn't happen again. They didn't see the harshness he put on himself. That boy wasn't afraid of throwing an interception. He was afraid of being replaced, not afraid of getting yelled at. He was afraid of being forgotten. And it was that fear, quiet but persistent, that pushed him forward more than any inspirational speech ever could. By his final years in high school, Tony understood one thing: the sports world doesn't owe you anything. No one is waiting to hand you a spot, a scholarship, or a chance. Every step forward has to be earned, and so he kept practicing in the dark, kept staying on the field after everyone else left, kept preparing for a future no one had promised would come. No one knew that on those nights, on an empty field under a freezing Wisconsin sky, an essential part of Tony Romo was being forged. Not explosive talent, but quiet will. Not innate confidence, but the determination not to let himself disappear from the dream. And that determination would follow him through all the years ahead, when the stadiums were no longer empty, when tens of thousands watched every throw, and when the fear of being forgotten turned into the fear of being misunderstood by all of America. The spring of '23 arrived quietly, but in the small room where Tony Romo sat waiting, the air felt heavy like before a storm. He had just wrapped up his college career at Eastern Illinois, with the Walter Payton Award, the most prestigious honor for the top offensive player at the FCS level. His stats were impressive. His achievements were clear. Yes. But when the '23 NFL draft came, what he had wasn't enough to erase the label, small school quarterback. Day 1 passed, then day 2. Names got called, dreams came true on national TV, but Tony's phone stayed silent. No ring, no cheaters, no moment of walking on stage to shake the commissioner's hand, just a silence that stretched out painfully. People say the draft is just an event, but for young players, it's a measure of worth. And in that moment, Romo had to face the cold truth. No team believed in him enough to pick him. The Walter Payton Award didn't change the scouts' minds. All those nights practicing in the dark in Burlington, all those years throwing in the cold Wisconsin wind, it seemed none of it was enough to make the phone ring even once. He didn't cry, he didn't slam the table, he didn't blame the system, he just sat there, quietly. And in that quiet, Tony Romo's double life became clearer than ever. On the outside, he told his family everything would be fine, that there were still chances as a free agent, that the draft didn't define an entire career. He smiled the way he'd learned since he was little, but inside the old fear returned. Maybe I really am not big enough. Finally the chance came, not under stage lights, but as an undrafted free agent contract with the Dallas Cowboys, not selected, but invited, not pursued but a trial option. On the outside, it was still the NFL, still the dream of millions of American boys. On the outside, Tony Romo was a Cowboys player, the team known as America's team, but inside, he understood how fragile his position was. An undrafted player always carries a question mark. A quarterback from a small school always has to prove more. The day he signed, the media didn't buzz. No one predicted he'd become the face of the franchise. He walked into the locker room, not as a guaranteed future, but as someone who had to fight just to stay on the roster before the season even started. The double life was no longer a vague feeling, it became reality. On the outside, the lucky rookie who got a shot. On the inside, the young man carrying the fear that he was only a backup plan, a name that could be crossed off at any moment. That moment when the phone didn't ring that year wasn't just a temporary disappointment. It etched into Tony's mind a belief that he would always have to prove he belonged here. And maybe that's exactly why, through all the years that followed, when he stood under the bright lights of Dallas, when he became the Cowboys' starting quarterback, a part of him remained that kid from the '23 draft night, the one who learned the world doesn't owe you recognition. You have to take it, one throw at a time. When Tony Romo walked into Dallas Cowboys headquarters as an undrafted free agent, he didn't step into an ordinary team, he stepped into America's team, the NFL's biggest brand, where every practice had reporters, every preseason game got dissected on national TV, and every quarterback spot got compared to legendary names in history. In Dallas, you don't just play football, you represent an icon. And for those first 3 years, Tony Romo represented silence. He was the backup quarterback. Not even the number 1 backup at first. He stood behind names drafted higher, trusted more, seen as the official solution. Every week he practiced like he'd be on the field Sunday. He studied the playbook meticulously, took notes on every detail, spent hours breaking down opponent film. He threw in practice with absolute focus, trying to make everything perfect, even though he knew when the game started, he'd be wearing a helmet standing on the sideline. 3 years, 3 seasons, 3 times watching the countdown clock in the stadium tunnel, without being the one leading the team out, while tens of thousands of fans chanted the starting quarterback's name. Romo stood behind, clipboard in hand, eyes tracking every situation. He prepared each week like the starting QB, but when Sunday came, he didn't take the field. That feeling wasn't loud, it wasn't a tragedy captured in newspaper headlines. It was a quiet, smoldering loneliness amid the bright lights. Dallas was the most scrutinized place in America, where every quarterback throw got analyzed inch by inch. But for Romo, those lights seemed to shine right through him, never stopping. No one came to the stadium for him. No one debated him on sports radio. He existed, but he wasn't the center of the story. In the locker room, Tony was still the upbeat guy. He cracked jokes, encouraged teammates, kept the mood light before high-pressure games. He smiled like he was completely fine with his current role. But there were nights, back in his small Texas apartment, when the stadium noise had faded, when he quietly asked himself a question he didn't dare say out loud: do I belong here? The double life grew clearer. On the outside, he was a Cowboys player, one of the 53 luckiest people in the sports world. On the inside, he was still the kid from draft night 23, carrying the fear that he was only a temporary backup plan. He understood that an undrafted quarterback always had to fight harder to stay on the roster. One mistake in practice could mean getting replaced. A new rookie could arrive and push him further down the depth chart. So he did the only thing he knew: prepare like no one believed in him. He stayed after practice to throw a few more routes. He asked coaches extra questions. He learned to read defenses faster, anticipate blitzes, adjust protections in his head like he was really standing in the pocket. No one saw those hours. No one wrote articles praising the persistence of a backup quarterback. But Romo knew if the chance came, even just once, he had to be ready. The feeling of being invisible on the most famous team in America was a painful paradox. You're in the lights, but you're not the one being lit up. You wear the Cowboys' silver star, but no one calls your name from the stands. And it was in those years that Tony Romo learned the most important thing of his career: your value isn't always measured by attention. Sometimes it's measured by how you prepare when no one is watching. 3 years as a backup didn't bring fame, but it forged patience in him. It taught him how to watch the game from the outside, how to understand the rhythm of the NFL, how to stay calm when everything around was chaos. And most importantly, it taught him that belonging isn't something given, it's something you have to earn. At the time, no one knew that invisible quarterback would one day become the face of the franchise. No one predicted he'd break the team's passing records. But Tony Romo didn't practice because of other people's predictions. He practiced because the fear of being forgotten was still there. And every Sunday, standing on the sideline, looking at the bright green field under the lights, he told himself, if that day comes, I'll be ready. The chance Tony Romo waited 3 years for finally arrived in the middle of the 26th season. He was handed the starting quarterback job for the Dallas Cowboys, and quickly injected new life into the team. Precise passes, mobility in the pocket, the ability to make plays when everything seemed to collapse. Dallas came alive. People started talking about Romo as an unexpected find, a beautiful story of the undrafted kid. But American sports doesn't remember beautiful stories for long. It remembers moments. And in January 27, during the 26th season wild card playoff game against the Seattle Seahawks, one moment changed how the whole country saw him. The game was tense to the point of suffocation. The score was razor close. Just over a minute left. The Cowboys had a chance to kick a field goal to take the lead. Romo wasn't just the quarterback then. He was also the holder for the decisive kick, a seemingly simple task. The snap from center came, and then in an instant, everything slipped from his hands. The ball didn't land right. It bounced up. It veered off. Romo tried to adjust, tried to secure it, then decided to run toward the corner of the end zone. In a moment slow like slow-motion film, the whole stadium seemed to hold its breath. He dove, stopped just yards short of the goal line. The ball hit the ground. The chance vanished. That moment lasted longer than reality. In Romo's mind, maybe it's still lasting even now. Bright lights, the roaring sound suddenly gone, only the pounding heartbeat in his chest. And then, when the final whistle blew, the silence turned to boos, disappointment, rapid commentary. The Cowboys lost. And to the public, the image of the game was summed up in one scene: Tony Romo botching the snap. The next day, the media didn't talk much about the journey from undrafted to starting quarterback. They didn't talk about the throws that got the team into the playoffs. They talked about the snap. They replayed it hundreds of times on national TV. Morning sports talk shows dissected every frame. Phrases started appearing: Romo doesn't have it in the clutch. Romo folds in big moments. In one night, he was no longer a fairy tale. He became a cautionary tale. That was the first public scar in Tony Romo's career. A mistake any player could make, but when it happened in Cowboys colors, under playoff lights, it stopped being a personal error. It became a symbol. People didn't see that Romo had put Dallas in position for that field goal attempt. They didn't see the string of accurate plays before it. They saw the snap slip from his hands, and from there a new story began to be written about him. The double life entered a new phase. On the outside, Romo stood at the mic, took responsibility, said it was his fault. He didn't blame the turf, the bad snap, the circumstances. He said exactly what a Cowboys quarterback is supposed to say. On the inside, maybe he wondered why one moment could overshadow all the effort. He wasn't afraid of failure, but he was afraid of being defined by failure. In the weeks that followed, he went back to practice. He threw like always. He smiled with teammates like always, but every time he stepped on the field, he knew millions were waiting to see if he'd repeat that mistake. The pressure was no longer the fear of being forgotten. Now it was the fear of being remembered for the wrong thing. The botched snap in 26 didn't end Tony Romo's career. On the contrary, he would go on to have outstanding seasons, break records, and bring the Cowboys back to the playoffs multiple times. But it marked a turning point. It placed a label on his shoulders that he had to carry for years: doubt. And every time he stepped into a big moment afterward, the memory of that snap always lingered somewhere in the air. Some players are remembered for winning moments. Tony Romo, for a long time, was remembered for a dropped one. That's the harshness of elite sports. And that was the moment when his double life became impossible to hide. The man smiling in front of the cameras, and the kid from Burlington who once feared he wasn't big enough, now having to face an entire country questioning his clutch ability. The 26 snap wasn't just a bad play. It opened a new chapter in how America saw Tony Romo. If before that he was just the young high-potential quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, after that playoff game he became an easy target. And in Dallas, where everything is always magnified, that target quickly spread nationwide. Late-night comedy shows started mentioning his name. Video clips of the snap got edited with canned laughter. Morning sports talk radio dissected Romo's clutch factor non-stop. The word choker, the guy who chokes in big moments, stuck to him like a shadow. Every subsequent loss got tied back to the old story. It was no longer an isolated mistake. It became proof. And that proof got repeated so often that it seemed no one wanted to see the rest of who he was anymore. Then his personal life entered the lens. His relationship with Jessica Simpson, a hugely popular pop star at the time, quickly turned into debate fodder. When the Cowboys lost another playoff game in the 27 season, some commentators didn't hesitate to imply her presence in the stands was the reason. Photos of Romo and Simpson on vacation in Mexico spread far and wide. He was no longer just a quarterback. He became a celebrity, part of pop culture. And when you're part of pop culture, people don't just analyze your throws, they analyze how you live. The double life now felt heavier than ever. On the outside, Tony Romo remained the face of one of America's biggest sports brands. He went to press conferences, answered questions with a calm voice. He said he was focused on football. He took responsibility for every loss. But on the inside, he had to confront something no one prepares a young quarterback for: collective mockery. The public thought he was nonchalant. They thought he was too relaxed, smiled too much. cared too much about life off the field. They saw magazine photos and concluded he wasn't serious enough. But in reality, Tony Romo did the only thing he knew when doubted. He worked harder. He stayed in the weight room longer. He watched more opponent film. He broke down every play where he made a mistake. There were days he left Cowboys headquarters, when it was pitch dark, body so exhausted, he just wanted to lie on the locker room floor. But he didn't talk about that on talk shows. He didn't leak it to the press. He just kept practicing. The loneliness amid the mocking laughter was a different kind of loneliness. It wasn't the loneliness of the backup kid standing on the sideline. It was the loneliness of someone seen by millions and misunderstood. Every time he turned on the TV and heard his name used as a punchline, Romo had to learn how to mute the outside noise so it wouldn't make him falter. But no one can be completely immune to repeated ridicule. Maybe the most painful thing wasn't being called a choker. It was that the label overshadowed everything else. The spectacular comebacks in regular seasons, the games where he led the team from behind, the moments he played through injury, all got diminished in favor of a more convenient story for the media, and that story kept getting told. In the locker room, Romo still kept the smile. He understood that a quarterback doesn't just throw the ball, he has to hold the team's spirit together. But there were nights when the stadium lights were off, and the echo of talk radio lingered only in his head when he had to face himself. He wasn't afraid of failure. He was used to having to prove himself. But he feared that no matter how well he played, a part of America had already decided his story, and so he kept living two lives. The first life, quarterback of America's team, appearing in commercials and on magazine covers. The second life, the young man wondering if all his effort would ever be enough to erase one moment. Amid the mocking laughter, amid the sensational headlines, Tony Romo didn't walk away from the field. He didn't respond with bitterness. He chose silence, chose work, chose to keep throwing like every pass was a chance to rewrite the story. And it was in that quiet persistence that something else was forming, not perfection but resilience forged in the fire of public opinion. The ridicule eventually faded with the news cycle, but one thing didn't fade with it: Tony Romo's body. While America debated his clutch ability, his relationship, whether he deserved to be the Dallas Cowboys quarterback, another battle quietly raged, not on the field, but inside his back, his shoulders and his spine. And that was the fiercest fight of all. In 2013, Romo underwent his first back surgery after a herniated disc. Before that, he had played in pain, trying to hide how serious the injury was. A quarterback isn't allowed to show weakness. A quarterback has to stand tall, look teammates in the eye and say everything's fine. But there were mornings when Romo woke up and felt the pain radiate down his spine, and he knew his body wasn't obeying like it used to. The training room became where he spent almost as much time as the film room. Massage tables, ice packs, resistance bands, physical therapists all became part of daily life. Back surgery isn't a simple stitch, it was a warning. For a quarterback, the back is the center of every motion, twisting, stepping, throwing. Every pass starts from the feet and travels through the spine, and when the spine is damaged, everything is threatened. Romo returned to the field, still smiling, still playing with that familiar confidence. But behind that smile was a quiet fear. What if the spine gives out permanently? What if one day he can't stand straight without pain? Then came the hits. In 2015, he broke his left collarbone. Not long after returning, he broke the same collarbone again in the same spot. A quarterback can't throw with a broken collarbone. Those times falling to the turf, lying on his back looking up at the Texas sky, Romo wasn't just thinking about the game slipping away from the team. He was thinking about the future. He was thinking about his family. He was thinking about whether he was paying too high a price for this dream. The training room back then was no longer a place for minor adjustments. It became a battlefield. Painkiller injections pierced the skin, tight wraps bound the shoulder. Doctors spoke about recovery timelines in neutral tones. But in Romo's head, every week sounded like an endless void. He hated sitting on the bench, hated the helplessness of watching his teammates fight while he couldn't help. But what he feared most was his body, no longer keeping pace with his will. The double life at this point reached its deepest level. The stadium saw a quarterback who smiled, high-fived teammates, and said he'd come back stronger, but his body was breaking apart piece by piece. Every twist to throw sent a sharp jolt down his back. Every sack, the ground wasn't just hard, it reminded him he was no longer invincible. Fans saw the touchdown throws. They didn't see the hours he spent lying on the treatment table, trying to stretch his spine so he could step onto the field on Sunday. There were nights when the pain wouldn't let him sleep through. Romo lay staring at the ceiling and thought about the boy in Burlington who once threw balls in the dark. Back then he feared being forgotten. Now he feared his body betraying him before he could finish the story. He knew in the NFL, opportunity doesn't wait for anyone. An injury could open the door for someone else, and when you return, your spot might not be there anymore. But instead of backing down, he kept fighting. The 2014 season was the clearest proof. Romo played at the highest efficiency of his career, led the NFL in passer rating, and led the Cowboys into the playoffs. Few knew he did it coming off back surgery. Few knew every throw came with a level of pain he'd learned to accept as part of the job. Chronic pain is a cruel companion. It's not loud like crowd boos. It whispers. It reminds you every morning that your body isn't what it used to be. And for Tony Romo, the man who always smiled under pressure, admitting he was in pain, wasn't easy. He chose to keep the optimism on the outside. He chose not to turn himself into a tragedy story. But deep down, he understood every season might be the last one. The body doesn't always hold up the way the will wants it to. And that was the biggest paradox in Tony Romo's life. His will never faltered. His belief never vanished. But the body, the tool to make it all happen, slowly wore down under the weight of the hits. The stadium still cheered. The cameras still caught the smile. But behind that smile was a man wondering how much longer he could endure. It was in those years when his body could no longer keep up that Tony Romo learned the most painful lesson of elite sports. You can control preparation, control attitude, control effort, but you can't fully control time. And when time starts knocking with back and shoulder pain, he still chose to step onto the field. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he didn't know how to live any other way. But if there was one season that proved the body could crack while the will stayed solid, it was 2014. After the 2013 back surgery, many doubted whether Tony Romo would ever be the same. A quarterback relies so much on upper body movement, on perfect rotation to generate throwing power. Would he still have the flexibility? Could a freshly operated spine withstand a full 16-game season? Those questions echoed across every preseason sports show. But when the season started, Romo didn't answer with words. He answered with throws. Every week he stepped onto the field with his back carefully taped under the pads. Every Monday morning, he woke up with a body heavier than most people could imagine. The training room became a familiar stop after every game. Ice packs on the back, muscle stim machines, doctors checking nerve reflexes. But on Sunday, when the music blared and the stadium filled up, Tony Romo smiled again, like his body had never been cut open. In 2014, he played with the highest efficiency of his career, completion percentage steady, quick decisions, less risk but more precision. He finished the season with the NFL's top passer rating, a number the people who once called him a choker couldn't easily ignore. Dallas won 12 games, reclaimed the NFC East. The fourth quarter throws, the games where Romo quietly controlled the tempo, all showed a more mature, disciplined, calmer quarterback. But the tragedy was that even at his best, he still had to prove he wasn't a failure. Every big game came with the old question, will he fold when the pressure's on? Those comments didn't disappear just because of one great season. They hovered waiting for the next moment to return. And Romo understood that. He knew reputation in the NFL isn't erased by one good year. It has to be rewritten every week. In the locker room, teammates saw a calm leader. Someone who never blamed others. Someone ready to take responsibility when needed. But they didn't see the hours he spent stretching his back, the long physical therapy sessions that stretched into the night. They didn't see the sharp pains every time he had to twist hard to escape an incoming pass rush. The stadium saw the touchdowns, They didn't see the moments he closed his eyes for a few seconds after a big hit, wondering if his spine had just taken another new injury. And then came the playoff game against Green Bay, a game that could have changed how people remembered Tony Romo. Dallas was ahead. Romo threw a perfect pass to DZ Bryant late in the game, a play many believed was the turning point. But after review, the officials ruled it wasn't a legal catch. That call became the center of controversy across America. The Cowboys lost, and once again the story didn't center on Romo's outstanding season. It centered on a controversial moment. Ironically, the season he played with the highest efficiency, with rare accuracy and discipline, ended with a decision out of his hands. And for many it only reinforced the old narrative: Romo and the playoffs don't mix. No one talked enough about how he led the team there while carrying a surgically repaired back. No one talked enough about how he changed his playing style to protect his body, to extend his career. For Tony Romo, 2014 wasn't just stats. It was proof he could stand tall after surgery, after mockery, after unfair labels. But even at his personal peak he wasn't allowed to breathe easy. Because in the NFL, especially in Dallas, the past always follows. And he understood he wasn't just playing to win games. He was playing to rewrite the story about himself. The boy in Burlington once feared being forgotten. The man in 2014 feared being misunderstood. And amid the impressive stats, amid the league-leading accurate throws, Tony Romo still had to live with the fact that part of America had already decided how they would view him. Even so, he stepped onto the field every week, back taped up, familiar smile on his face, and kept proving not that he was perfect, but that he never stopped fighting. If the 2014 season was a declaration that Tony Romo could still stand tall, then 2016 was a cruel reminder that time doesn't side with anyone. Heading into 2015, he was still the undisputed quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. He had just had the most efficient season of his career. He had just proven that a surgically repaired back couldn't stop him from playing at the highest level. But just a few weeks after the season started, his body spoke up again. In September 2015, Romo broke his left collarbone after a hard hit. The stadium went quiet as he lay on the turf, clutching his shoulder. He left the field, knowing once more he'd have to step back into the training room. He returned after a few weeks, only to break the same collarbone in the same spot in another sack. 2 breaks in the same season. That was no longer an accident. It was a signal that his body was rebelling. Dallas's 2015 season collapsed without him. The team struggled with replacement options, and in that chaos, Romo could only stand on the sideline, taped up, watching, trying to keep his teammates' spirits up. He knew the quarterback position doesn't wait for anyone. The NFL doesn't build plans on loyalty. It runs on performance and health. The 2016 season began with hope he'd return healthy. But in a preseason game, he suffered another back injury. No longer the collarbone, this time it was the spine, where he'd had surgery before. The news spread fast, and while Romo entered recovery once again, a 4th-round rookie named Dak Prescott was given the chance to play. Dak didn't just play solid, he played outstanding, calm, confident, low on mistakes. The Cowboys started winning consistently. The team found a new rhythm. The media began asking, did Dallas even need Romo back? When Romo recovered and was cleared to play, he wasn't handed the starting job back. That was the moment no statistic could have prepared him for. Not because he played poorly, not because he no longer understood the game, but because his body had shown the team its fragility. And the NFL doesn't bet its future on fragility. The press conference happened in November 2016. Romo stood at the mic, wearing a simple hoodie, his familiar calm face in place. He talked about the competitive nature of sports. He said football is a meritocracy, where the better player gets to play. He wished Dak success. He showed no bitterness, no blame, no complaints. His voice stayed steady, every word measured, but his eyes told the truth. Not anger, but the deep sadness of a man who understood the most important chapter of his life had just closed without a proper goodbye. In that moment, Tony Romo's double life collapsed. For years he had lived 2 lives, quarterback of America's team and the man enduring in silence. But now those 2 lives collided head-on. He could no longer hide the pain behind a touchdown. He could no longer rewrite the story with a comeback. He had to accept that his position belonged to someone else, not because he lacked will, but because his body could no longer keep its promise. Perhaps the most painful thing wasn't losing the job. It was knowing he could still play, knowing his mind was still sharp, knowing he could still lead a team, but understanding that the NFL doesn't judge only by the mind, it judges by the durability of the body, and his body had paid the price for every hit over more than a decade. Romo didn't storm out of the locker room in anger. He didn't divide the team. He stayed, supported Dak, talked to him on the bench, shared experience. He chose the role of big brother over wounded party. That was a choice of dignity. But dignity doesn't erase the sadness. 2016 changed everything. It didn't just mark a generational shift in Dallas. It marked the moment Tony Romo had to face the question he'd once avoided. Who am I if I'm no longer the Cowboys' quarterback? When your identity has been tied to one position for 14 years, letting go isn't simple. In the training room, where he'd once fought to come back, he probably realized this battle was no longer with his body, it was with his sense of self. And for the first time in years, he couldn't answer with a throw. He could only stand at the mic, offer a small smile, and speak words more mature than any pass he'd ever made. That year, everything changed, not with a botched play, not with a talk show joke, but with the silence of a decision. And in that silence, Tony Romo stepped out of the lights with the same smile he'd learned as a kid. But this time, behind that smile was the acceptance that one chapter had closed forever. After the 2016 press conference, where Tony Romo spoke words more mature than any pass he'd ever made, the only question left was time. He remained on the Dallas Cowboys roster for one more season, but everyone understood his quarterback chapter was over. In April 2017, Romo officially announced his retirement. No grand farewell on the stadium field. No shining Super Bowl ring on his finger. No moment lifting the trophy under confetti rain. Just a man standing in front of the cameras, smiling the way he always smiled, and saying goodbye. In the NFL world, where legacy is often measured by championships, leaving without a ring can be seen as a shortfall. Romo knew that. He knew that no matter how many yards he'd thrown, how many franchise records he'd set, the question, "But do you have a Super Bowl?" would always come up. And the answer was no. No Super Bowl appearance. No final moment to rewrite every doubt. But Tony Romo's story can't be told only by what he didn't have. It has to be told by the opportunities injuries stole away. 2015 could have been different if the collarbone hadn't broken twice. 2016 could have played out differently if his back hadn't flared up in preseason. Even before that, his peak years were always shadowed by pain. There were seasons he played at Pro Bowl level, but the supporting cast wasn't deep enough. There were years the Cowboys got close to the playoffs, but a controversial moment changed the outcome. The tragedy of Romo isn't in obvious failure, it's in the unfinished seasons, in the feeling that potential was never fully realized, in looking back at a career and wondering what would have happened if the body had held up just a few more years. But what stands out most is how he left. He didn't blame the team, he didn't curse fate, he didn't turn himself into a victim of circumstance. In his retirement announcement, he spoke of gratitude. He spoke of the journey from undrafted free agent to starting quarterback of the Cowboys. He spoke of the pride in wearing the silver star on his helmet. Not a single bitter word, not a single hint that he deserved more. That was the dignity of a man who understood sports don't promise perfect fairness. Walking away without a ring, leaving without the ring can be viewed as a shortfall. But for Tony Romo, it was the truth he accepted. He had thrown more than 34,000 yards. He had brought the Cowboys back to the playoffs multiple times. He had endured hits that broke bones and spine surgeries to keep playing. He had lived two lives for 14 years in Dallas, the hero and the doubted one, the star and the target of mockery. And when the time came, he chose to walk away with his head held high. Perhaps Tony Romo's legacy isn't in the ring he doesn't have. It lies in the way he walked off the field, in the silence without resentment, in accepting that sometimes you can do everything right and still not get the final trophy. And in that acceptance, there is another kind of victory, not loud, not glittering, but deeper. When he hung up his helmet, the double life ended in the quietest way. No more quarterback having to prove he wasn't a choker, no more body forced beyond its limits, just a man looking back at his journey and knowing he gave everything. And sometimes in a sports world, where success is measured by titles, giving everything, even without the ring, is the most worthy of respect. After hanging up the helmet, Tony Romo didn't fall into the void many feared. He didn't try to cling to the stadium lights. He went home. Not the Dallas locker room, not the training room smelling of antiseptic, but a quiet house in Texas, where the loudest noise wasn't crowd boos, but the laughter of small children. There was Candace Crawford, the woman he married in 2011, who entered his life amid the peak years of media scrutiny and pressure. Candace didn't love Tony for the yards he threw, not for the franchise records, not because he was the Dallas Cowboys quarterback. She loved the man behind the helmet. Through the years he faced injuries, unfair labels. Candace was there, not on talk shows, not in loud commentary, but in the quiet presence of someone who understood the biggest pain often doesn't appear on screen. Their three boys don't know about the 26 snap, they don't care about passer rating, they don't debate the playoffs. In that house, Tony Romo isn't a choker, he isn't a genius at reading the game, he isn't a legendary quarterback, or a failure who never won a championship. He's just Dad, the guy playing catch in the backyard, the one kneeling to tie shoelaces, the one teaching them to throw a football for the first time, but never talking about having to become a star. At home, no one calls him a savior when things go well, and no one calls him a failure when things don't. No talk radio, no dissecting every decision, no cameras capturing every expression, just family dinners, just laughter when a backyard throw goes wide, just ordinary evenings, the kind he rarely got to fully enjoy during all those playing years. In that ordinary life, the double life dissolved. No more two versions of Tony Romo, one for the public, one for himself, just one person, a husband, a father, a man who walked through the lights and returned to quiet. Perhaps what's most remarkable is how he adapted to this change. He didn't try to stay in the spotlight. He didn't live with bitterness over what wasn't achieved. He redirected that competitive energy elsewhere, into raising his kids, into golf rounds, into a broadcasting career that blossomed. But the house in Texas remained the most important place, because there, he didn't have to prove anything, didn't have to do more to be believed in, didn't have to prepare like no one trusted him. There, love didn't depend on performance. And for someone who spent nearly 2 decades proving he was worthy, that unconditional acceptance was perhaps the greatest gift. There are evenings, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, when Romo might think back on the journey, about the boy in Burlington who feared he wasn't big enough, about the 23 draft kid waiting for a phone that never rang, about the quarterback mocked, then praised. All those versions now blend into one single person. No need for lights to confirm his worth, no need for a title to prove who he is. And perhaps, in the laughter of 3 kids running around the backyard, Tony Romo found what a Super Bowl couldn't give: peace. Not victory in front of 80,000 people, but victory over the doubts inside himself. In that quiet Texas house, the double life ended not with noise, but with simplicity. And sometimes, that very simplicity is the most enduring achievement. The peace in the Texas house didn't mean Tony Romo vanished from the lights. It just meant the lights changed. In 2017, when many thought he'd try to find another team to keep playing, Romo chose a different path, stepping into the CBS Sports broadcast booth. To many it was a surprising decision, but to anyone who'd seen him break down film, heard him talk coverage and blitz in the locker room, it felt almost natural. Right from the early games, America noticed something different. Tony Romo didn't just call the game, he predicted it. Before the snap, he called the exact route that would be run, the coverage the defense was disguising, where the space would open up. Viewers were stunned. Social media spread clips of him reading plays. People who once mocked him started using a new word: tactical genius. Within a few years, Romo signed a contract the press called worth about $17 million a year, one of the biggest in sports broadcasting history. From doubted quarterback, he became the lead face for the NFL's biggest games on national TV. The guy once called a choker was now respected for his razor-sharp football mind. That rebirth seemed perfect. New lights, new role, no more hits cracking the spine, no more mornings waking to pain radiating down the back. Now he could love football without paying for it with his body. But every rebirth carries memories, and memories don't disappear just because you change jobs. When Romo sits in the broadcast booth, headset on, voice full of excitement, no one sees the nights he's home alone, re-watching old playoff games. No one sees him pause for a few seconds at the 26-snap moment, or the controversial 2014 Green Bay play. No one sees his eyes lower when mentioning chances that slipped away. The double life no longer exists as before, between the public and the training room, but it still lives in memory. On the outside, he's the respected expert, who reads the game better than almost anyone on TV. On the inside, he's still the man who carried an unfulfilled Super Bowl dream. There's a beautiful paradox in Tony Romo's new role. During his quarterback years, he was often judged on a few moments. Now he's praised for seeing the whole picture before it happens. Perhaps those years of doubt, of every mistake dissected, sharpened that tactical eye. He knows what it feels like to stand in the pocket when pressure rushes in. He knows what it's like to make split-second decisions while the whole stadium holds its breath. And because he lived under that pressure, he can explain it with rare empathy. But the new reputation doesn't erase the old questions. Occasionally, when a playoff game unfolds and a young quarterback makes a mistake, Romo might feel a small pang inside, not bitterness, but because he knows exactly what that feels like. He never publicly says he deserved the ring. He doesn't turn old games into excuses, but memory is something no one can negotiate. Under different lights, Tony Romo was reborn, not with the throwing arm, but with the mind, not with enduring hits, but with reading the game. The once mocked man is now invited to the biggest games, trusted to guide viewers through every situation, and perhaps that's football's belated fairness, not with a ring, not with a trophy lift, but with the acknowledgement that Tony Romo always understood the game deeper than people once thought. Under the new lights, he no longer has to prove he's not a failure, but in quiet nights, when the broadcast booth goes dark and the Texas house falls asleep, he still knows a part of his heart will always belong to those past Sundays, where the dream was so close, but never quite reached. There's a simple measure American sports often uses to judge a career: how many rings do you have? By that measure, Tony Romo will always stand behind the quarterbacks who lifted the Lombardi Trophy. No Super Bowl, no final crowning moment, no photo of him hoisting the cup amid confetti rain. But if you only look at what he didn't have, you miss what he left behind. Romo left the Dallas Cowboys with a string of franchise records: more than 34,000 passing yards, 248 touchdowns, the most wins by a starting quarterback in team history at the time of his retirement. For more than a decade, he was the face of the Cowboys during a transitional era, as the team rediscovered its identity after the glory years of the 1990s. He didn't just play football, he carried the expectations of a brand known as America's team. Romo's loyalty to the Cowboys is also part of that legacy. He didn't look for a way out when doubted. He didn't demand a trade when mocked. He didn't publicly express discontent when he lost his job to Dak Prescott. In an era where players readily switched teams to chase better opportunities, Romo chose to stay. He accepted the backup role at the end of 2016 without creating drama, without dividing the locker room. He supported his successor, offering encouraging words instead of jealousy. Romo's legacy isn't in titles, but in how he endured. He endured hits that broke his collarbone. He endured back surgery and the fear that his spine would never be the same. He endured late-night TV mockery. He endured the choker label repeated for years, and he did all of it without letting it turn him bitter. Some players leave legacies through dazzling wins. Tony Romo left a legacy through quiet resilience. He never blamed teammates in front of cameras. He never criticized coaches. He never sought pity when his body could no longer match his will. Even as a CBS Sports commentator, he rarely talks about lost chances. he speaks about football with genuine love, as if painful memories are just part of the journey, not its definition. A legacy written in scars is perhaps the most accurate way to describe Tony Romo. Every scar on his body tells a story about sacks that shook stadiums, about seasons played in pain, about rising after an entire country doubted him. But there are invisible scars too. The hurt of being defined by one moment, the sadness of giving up the position he loved most, the feeling of knowing he came so close to the dream, but never touched it. Yet it's in those very scars that Romo built the image of a man who never quit. He wasn't perfect, he had heartbreaking losses, but he always stepped back onto the field, with the same smile, the same preparation, the same will to prove he belonged there. And when time forced him to leave, he left with dignity. Perhaps Tony Romo's greatest legacy isn't the numbers on the stat sheet, it's how he made teammates believe in him, how he refused to let labels break him, how he kept kindness in a brutal environment. In a league where harshness often wears people down, Romo kept the smile of the boy from Burlington, the smile that learned to face pressure early on. No ring, but a complete journey, no final crowning moment, but hundreds of moments where he got back up after contact. And sometimes in sports as in life, what's most memorable isn't where you finish, it's how you endure when things don't go as dreamed. Tony Romo endured with composure, with effort, with dignity, and that's why his legacy doesn't need a ring to be respected. Professional football rarely allows a neat ending. American sports loves trophy-lifting stories, shining rings, moments frozen forever in history. But Tony Romo's story didn't end with fireworks. It ended in silence, and it's in that silence that we see him most clearly. He didn't win every game. He didn't achieve every dream. He wasn't given the crown millions of players crave, no Super Bowl to place on the table when people debate legacy, no ring to hold up when someone asks, "What did you prove?" But if legacy is measured only by metal and silver cups, then football missed the most important thing Tony Romo left behind. He didn't blame others. When the 26 snaps slipped from his hands, he took responsibility. When playoff years didn't reach the final destination, he didn't criticize teammates or coaches. When his body stopped obeying, he didn't curse fate. When he lost his job to Dak Prescott, he didn't divide the locker room. In a league where egos often drown out the final whistle, Romo chose dignified silence. He didn't abandon the team. He could have sought a fresh start elsewhere when doubted. He could have requested a trade when labeled a choker. But he stayed with the Dallas Cowboys, the team that gave him his first chance, and also placed the heaviest burden on his shoulders. He stuck with that silver star his entire career, accepting both its glory and its weight. He didn't betray his family. Amid years of scrutiny, injuries and pressure, he still came home to Texas, still the husband to Candace, still the father to 3 boys. No loud scandals, no reckless impulses destroying what mattered most. When the stadium lights went out, he chose the quiet home over chasing more attention, and most importantly, he didn't lose himself. Tony Romo didn't let labels define him. He didn't let one wrong moment become the whole story. He didn't let mocking laughter turn him bitter. He kept that smile, the smile that started with the boy in Burlington, who always felt he had to prove something. But over time, that smile stopped being armor hiding fear. It became an expression of acceptance. Some win with rings. They get their names etched in history through championship games, and they deserve it. But there are also those who win by standing firm when the world turns its back, by stepping back onto the field when their body cracks, by refusing to let doubt turn them into someone else. Tony Romo belongs to the second group. He lived 2 lives, one for America to see, the quarterback of America's team, who threw more than 34,000 yards, who was mocked then respected, who was reborn under CBS Sports lights as an outstanding tactical mind, and another life quieter, known to few, where he fought back pain, fought the fear of being misunderstood, fought memories of chances that slipped away. Those 2 lives weren't opposites, they complemented each other, the man on the field and the man in the training room, the confident broadcaster and the father sitting on the Texas porch, reflecting on the past. Together they make a complete Tony Romo, not perfect, not a legend in the conventional sense, but real, and perhaps that's what makes his story touch more people than any ring ever could. Because in life, not everyone achieves their biggest dream, not everyone stands on the highest podium, but everyone has their own games, their own injuries, their own moments when the whole world seems to doubt them. The question isn't how many titles you have. The question is, when things don't go as expected, do you still hold on to who you are? Tony Romo didn't win every game, but he won a different battle, the battle not to become a bitter version of himself. And in the harsh world of the NFL, where glory often overshadows the person, that victory may be rarer than any Super Bowl ring. Looking back on Tony Romo's journey, what saddens people isn't that he never had a Super Bowl ring, but how one man had to bear so much prejudice, just because of a few wrong moments. From the 26-snap replayed hundreds of times on TV, to the mocking laughter on talk shows calling him a choker, Romo was framed by fleeting seconds instead of seen through his long journey. He played the 2014 season with the NFL's top passer rating, after back surgery, threw more than 34,000 yards for the Dallas Cowboys, endured broken collarbones and chronic pain, yet still stepped onto the field with a smile. He lost his job to Dak Prescott in 2016, and stood at the press conference speaking about meritocracy, in a calm voice, even though his eyes carried deep sadness. He retired without blame, without drama, then was reborn under CBS Sports lights with a $17 million a year contract, a belated recognition of the football intelligence many had overlooked before. But above all, he returned to the quiet house in Texas, where no one called him a failure or a savior, only Dad. Romo's story reminds Americans that success isn't only in the final trophy. In a society that prizes achievements and titles, we easily forget that dignity in facing failure is the most enduring measure. The lesson from Romo isn't to win at all costs, but to hold on to yourself when the whole world doubts you. And sometimes, the greatest victory is not letting other people's labels define your worth. If Tony Romo's story makes you rethink the value of resilience and dignity in life, hit subscribe to the channel so we can keep exploring emotional journeys like this one. Thank you for listening all the way through, and see you in the next video, where another story will remind us that sometimes the biggest win isn't on the scoreboard.